Spinoza. Forgiveness is useless. Forgiveness. The world worships this word as if it were sacred. You are told from childhood that forgiveness is divine, that to forgive is to be free, that to release resentment is to heal. But Spinoza, the philosopher who was excommunicated from his own people for thinking too clearly, saw through the illusion. He understood something radical. Forgiveness, as most people practice it, is not healing. It is submission. Let that sentence sink in. Most forgiveness is not a liberation of the spirit. It is the self's attempt to keep the peace while it silently bleeds. People forgive because they are afraid of confrontation. They forgive because they want to appear good. They forgive because society rewards them for being docile, for being spiritually obedient. But Spinoza looked at emotions like a surgeon looks at a body, not morally but mechanically. And he realized, you cannot forgive what you do not understand. You cannot let go of pain while you still depend on the very people who caused it. When Spinoza said that forgiveness was useless, he wasn't being cruel, he was being honest. Because forgiveness that is born from weakness only hides resentment beneath a polite smile. You forgive, but your soul still trembles. You forgive, but your body still tenses when you remember. You forgive, but deep down, you still wish justice existed. Forgiveness, in the modern sense, is emotional cosmetics. It hides the wound, but the infection remains. Spinoza proposed something far more dangerous: understanding. He said, do not forgive. Understand why people act as they do. Once you truly understand, forgiveness becomes unnecessary. Pause here. Think about that. Forgiveness becomes unnecessary. Not because you are cold, but because you no longer take the offense personally. Because you see that everyone is simply acting according to the laws of their own nature. Their fears, their ignorance, their lack of power. This is the moment your soul grows up. When you stop expecting moral justice from a blind universe, you stop being a victim. You stop saying, they shouldn't have hurt me, and you begin to say, they couldn't have done otherwise. And in that realization, not in forgiveness, lies your freedom. Forgiveness is useless, because understanding makes it obsolete. You can feel this in your own life. Think of the person who betrayed you, the one you tried to forgive again and again. But each time the wound reopened. You said, I forgive you, but your heart didn't. Because the pain wasn't asking for forgiveness. It was asking for comprehension. The truth is, most people don't deserve forgiveness, not because they're evil, but because they are unconscious. You can't forgive someone who never knew what they were doing. You can only awaken from the illusion that they should have known better. That awakening and that Spinoza's clarity is not softness, it is power. So today, stop trying to be good. Stop performing peace for the world. Instead, be clear, be calm. Be rational, understand. The moment you see clearly, all the need for forgiveness dissolves, like fog under sunlight. If these words awaken something inside you, if you've ever felt tired of pretending to be good just to avoid guilt, then stay with me. This isn't a sermon, it's an awakening. Subscribe to Light of the Spirit, because here we don't worship comfort, we worship truth, even when it burns. Spinoza was excommunicated for this, for saying that morality is an illusion created by those who misunderstand the laws of life. He claimed that everything in existence acts out of necessity, not choice, not evil, not goodness, but necessity. And that includes you and your enemies. When you see the world through that lens, forgiveness begins to look like a primitive idea. You realize that no one owes anyone forgiveness, because no one could have done differently. To forgive would imply that someone chose to hurt you. But Spinoza says choice is an illusion. What exists is only cause and effect. He saw people not as saints or sinners, but as systems of causes, fears producing actions, desires creating mistakes, ignorance breeding cruelty. If you understand this, truly understand it, you stop expecting moral perfection. You stop waiting for an apology that never comes. You stop building your peace on the behavior of others. And that paradoxically is when you finally heal. Spinoza didn't teach forgiveness. He taught liberation through comprehension. When you understand that people act according to their inner necessity, your hatred dissolves on its own. Not because you forgave, but because there's nothing left to forgive. The truth is, forgiveness often keeps you trapped in the past. It forces you to keep remembering the wound, just so you can keep repeating your virtue. I forgive you becomes a badge of spiritual superiority, a mask of pain pretending to be light. Spinoza would have called it emotional vanity. Because the real master doesn't need to forgive, he simply understands and moves on. This is the first illusion Spinoza destroys. That forgiveness makes you noble. It doesn't. Understanding does. Forgiveness still places you above someone, as if saying, I am good and you are guilty, but I choose to release you. Understanding removes hierarchy. It says, you are a force of nature, and so am I. We both act as we must. That is not weakness, it's divine neutrality. It's when your mind becomes so free that no one can emotionally enslave you again. When Spinoza looked at the human mind, he saw that people live like waves in a storm. Every thought, every feeling, every reaction is just motion. Most people forgive because their emotions demand resolution. They cannot bear the chaos of unfinished stories. They say, I must forgive to move on. But in truth, they forgive not out of strength, but out of weakness, to silence their own unrest. Spinoza saw the flaw in this. He said, you do not control your emotions by moral decisions. You control them only through understanding. Forgiveness for him was an act of ignorance, understanding an act of power. You see, forgiveness still depends on emotion. Understanding transcends it. Forgiveness says, you hurt me, but I will rise above it. Understanding says, you hurt me because you are bound by your own nature. I see the chain that moves you, and in seeing it, I am no longer bound to it. That's a completely different dimension of freedom. It's not emotional victory. It's metaphysical clarity. Think about how you react when someone wrongs you. You feel anger. Anger leads to pain. Pain demands justice. And if justice doesn't come, forgiveness becomes the substitute. It's the emotional bandage that hides the unhealed wound. But when you step into understanding, you see that anger is simply energy misdirected. You stop needing to control others to feel peace, because you now control your perception. This is what Spinoza called intellectual love of God. Not religious, but cosmic. It means loving reality itself, even when it doesn't serve your desires. When you reach that level of awareness, you no longer need to forgive anyone, because you no longer take things personally. Everything becomes part of the infinite motion of nature. Everything belongs. Even your pain, forgiveness is personal. Understanding is universal. Forgiveness says, I choose peace. Understanding says, peace is what already is, once I stop resisting the truth. When you operate from understanding, resentment cannot survive, because resentment requires illusion, the illusion that someone could have done better. Spinoza destroys that illusion completely. He says, every man acts from the necessity of his nature. That includes the liar, the betrayer, the abuser, the coward. They are not exceptions, they are examples. They are symptoms of ignorance, not monsters of morality. And when you see this clearly, you stop hating. Not because you decided to be kind, but because hate becomes logically impossible. That is the power of understanding. It rewires your emotional universe. People confuse compassion with forgiveness. They think compassion means excusing behavior. But Spinoza's compassion was far more intelligent. He called it the joy of understanding the necessity of things. He didn't weep for humanity. He understood it. And in that understanding, there was peace. When you understand, you don't need to announce that you forgive. You simply stop reacting. You stop arguing with reality. You start flowing with it. This is what makes a human being powerful. Not moral performance, but metaphysical calm. You can test this right now. Think of a person who disappointed you. Imagine all the ways you replayed the moment in your mind, trying to make it right. Now look at them not as a villain, but as a machine of causes. See their childhood, their ignorance, their fears, their desires, all converging like gears in a clock that could only tick the way it did. Suddenly you realize there was never really a choice. And with that realization, your anger becomes pointless. The entire emotional economy collapses. Only stillness remains. That stillness, that's what Spinoza called freedom. Freedom from emotional slavery. Freedom from illusion. Freedom from forgiveness itself. If these words are awakening something inside you, a new form of calm, a new power, don't let it fade. Subscribe to Light of the Spirit now, because this channel is not about comfort, it's about clarity. Here, we strip away illusions one by one until your mind becomes untouchable. Share this video with someone who's been trapped in emotional chaos. Let them see that forgiveness is not the answer. Understanding is. Now the question arises, if forgiveness is useless, how should we deal with those who harm us? What replaces forgiveness? What fills the void when we no longer cling to the idea of moral debt? Spinoza's answer is as elegant as it is ruthless, indifference born of clarity. He believed that emotional independence was the ultimate virtue. You don't forgive them. You don't hate them. You simply stop needing them to be anything other than what they are. You rise above their influence, not morally, but energetically, because they no longer determine your internal state. That is the silent revenge of the wise, unshakable tranquility. The one who truly understands human nature cannot be manipulated. You cannot guilt trip them. You cannot offend them. You cannot dominate them. They see through you as if you are made of glass. They recognize that your insults come from insecurity, your betrayal from fear, your cruelty from pain. And because they see so clearly, they remain calm. That's Spinoza's ultimate teaching. The wise man is not the one who forgives easily. The wise man is the one who no longer needs to. He taught that peace does not come from controlling the world, but from understanding its necessity. This is why forgiveness is useless, because it assumes something went wrong. But in Spinoza's eyes, nothing ever goes wrong. It simply goes as it must. Reality doesn't need your approval. It doesn't need your mercy. It only needs your understanding. Once you accept this, your life transforms. Suddenly, the people you once hated become teachers. The pain that once broke you becomes insight. And the word forgiveness disappears, replaced by something infinitely more powerful. Acceptance without attachment. That's what freedom feels like. No guilt, no resentment, no expectation. Just pure conscious serenity. The kind that no one can take from you. Spinoza once wrote that freedom is the understanding of necessity, a phrase so simple that most people read it and miss its entire fire. To understand necessity means to see that everything, including your emotions, is caused. Every thought, every desire, every heartbreak is part of an infinite chain stretching back to the birth of the universe. When you see this, you stop reacting. You begin to live in a state that is not cold but clear. This is detachment. Not apathy but lucidity. The kind of calm that cannot be provoked, because it comes from seeing reality as a system, not a story. People think detachment means not caring, but Spinoza meant something deeper: caring without clinging, loving without dependency, acting without expectation. He didn't want you to become emotionless. He wanted you to become untouchable. Forgiveness ties you to the past. Detachment releases you into the present. Because when you forgive, you still acknowledge that someone had power over your peace. But when you understand and detach, that power dissolves. You no longer replay the scene in your head, rewriting the script of pain. You simply see it as a movement in the grand mechanics of existence, an event that could not have been otherwise. When you reach that point, forgiveness feels like child's play. You don't forgive the wave for breaking. You don't forgive the rain for falling. You don't forgive a person for acting out their limited nature. You simply move with the rhythm of things. This is what Spinoza called aligning with the order of nature. To him, wisdom wasn't found in prayer, guilt, or forgiveness. It was found in alignment. The soul that aligns with reality is unbreakable. Detachment is not running away. It's seeing so clearly that you no longer get lost. You stop personalizing what isn't personal. You stop expecting the world to bend to your emotions. And in that moment, you transcend the emotional economy of society. Because let's face it, a society thrives on emotional debt. People hurt you, you demand apologies. They apologize, you feel superior. You forgive, you feel noble. It's all a game of power disguised as morality. Spinoza refused to play that game. He didn't forgive his persecutors. He didn't hate them either. He simply withdrew into a higher dimension of perception, a place where their ignorance could no longer touch him. That's real strength. Not the strength of muscles or vengeance, but the strength of perspective. The modern world loves the word forgiveness because it keeps people weak. It keeps you emotionally dependent. It trains you to keep reopening the same wound so you can look holy while bleeding. Spinoza's philosophy is the opposite. It teaches you to close the wound by understanding that there was never a wound to begin with, only a movement of energy misinterpreted by the mind. When someone insults you, they're revealing their nature, not defining yours. When someone betrays you, they're expressing their limitation, not proving your failure. The moment you see this, you are free. You no longer carry emotional debt. You no longer keep mental scorecards of who owes you peace, because no one can owe you peace. Peace is a byproduct of perception, not apology. Forgiveness is a negotiation with your pain. Understanding is its dissolution. Spinoza's entire system points toward this truth. Nothing external can take from you what you have understood internally. But how do you live this in practice? How do you embody this detachment without turning into a statue? The answer lies in awareness. Every time you feel triggered, when someone says something cruel, when a memory returns, Instead of fighting it, study it. Look at the cause. Ask, what in me is reacting? What illusion am I defending? What expectation have I built against the truth of what is? When you question your reactions, you disarm them. They lose their poison. And slowly, your emotional system becomes transparent. The drama fades, the noise dims, and your mind becomes a quiet mirror, reflecting life without distortion. That mirror, that's your freedom. It's important to understand that this detachment doesn't make you passive. In fact, it makes you more powerful. Because once your emotions no longer rule you, your actions become precise, clean, and unstoppable. You stop wasting energy on resentment and redirect it toward creation. You stop performing morality and start practicing clarity. Spinoza believed that when the mind truly understands itself, its actions align with nature's intelligence. That's what he called the active life. You act, not react. You create, not compensate. You move, not justify. That is the real meaning of mastery. Not control over others, but over the illusions that others live by. If you felt this truth stirring within you, that quiet rebellion against emotional dependence, then you're already walking the Spinoza's path. Don't stop here. Let this clarity sink deeper. And if this message resonates, share it. Because the world needs fewer forgivers and more understanders. The world doesn't need your apologies. It needs your lucidity. Subscribe to Light of the Spirit for more awakenings like this. Each video is a mirror for your mind to help you see beyond illusion and step into real strength. Spinoza's detachment is not cold. It's compassionate in the highest sense. Because once you understand that everyone acts from necessity, you stop demanding perfection. You stop playing the moral judge. You start to see humanity as a single movement of existence, learning through error, ignorance, and pain. And that vision breeds a new kind of love, one without dependency or expectation. This love doesn't say, I forgive you. It says, I see you clearly, and therefore I cannot hate you. It's not emotional weakness. It's spiritual precision. That's why forgiveness in Spinoza's system is obsolete. When you truly love reality, when you understand the engine behind every action, there's nothing left to forgive. In a world obsessed with guilt and virtue, this message sounds brutal. Because most people don't want truth. They want comfort. They want to keep their wounds because it gives them identity. They want to keep their pain because it gives them purpose. They want to keep forgiving because it makes them feel holy. But if you are here, listening to this, you are not most people. You are seeking a higher kind of freedom, one that doesn't depend on applause or validation. The freedom of clarity, the freedom of understanding, the freedom of inner silence. Spinoza's universe has no villains, no saints, no sinners, only motion, only cause and effect dancing in infinite rhythm. And in that vision lies a truth so powerful that it can dissolve the very structure of morality as we know it. When you finally see that everything, every betrayal, every heartbreak, every failure happens through necessity, you stop judging life. You stop dividing the world into right and wrong, good and evil, forgiveness and vengeance. You see it as a vast network of forces, each obeying its nature. And from that realization, something extraordinary happens. Your mind aligns with divine intelligence, not the God of religion, but the God of reason, the infinite order that Spinoza called Deus sive Natura, God or nature. He meant they are the same, that everything, including your suffering, is God expressing itself through form. And when you understand this, forgiveness doesn't just become useless, it becomes absurd. Because how can you forgive a universe that is doing exactly what it must? In the eyes of divine intelligence, forgiveness is the language of confusion. Understanding is the language of awakening. The man who forgives believes he was wronged. The man who understands knows he was transformed. Every wound that enters your life carries a secret message. Spinoza would say, your suffering is a signal. Not that the world has failed you, but that your mind has not yet understood the law behind it. Once you understand, the pain evaporates like mist in sunlight. Not because it disappears, but because you now see its purpose. That purpose is evolution. To refine your perception, to pull you out of emotional slavery and into awareness. This is what it means to awaken to divine intelligence. To see that your story, your mistakes, your enemies, your heartbreak, all of it, were necessary chapters in the infinite book of nature. People think enlightenment is a feeling of bliss, but Spinoza knew it was something quieter, colder, purer. A state where judgment ends, where you stop labeling experiences as blessings or curses, where you simply see. That vision is love, not emotional love, but intellectual love of God, The love born from understanding the perfection hidden within chaos. This love doesn't cry. It doesn't beg. It doesn't forgive. It simply recognizes. It looks at pain and says, you are also God. It looks at failure and says, you too belong. And in that instant, every contradiction collapses. You stop saying, why did this happen to me? You begin to say, of course it had to happen. That single shift in perspective transforms suffering into wisdom and forgiveness into clarity. Imagine walking through life with that kind of vision. Someone insults you, you observe. Someone betrays you, you understand. You lose everything, you realign. No resentment, no moral drama, no self-pity, just quiet strength flowing through your veins. That's what it means to live with divine intelligence. And when you live this way, you stop taking pride in being the one who forgives. Because forgiveness assumes superiority, a hidden ego that says, I am the one with the moral high ground. But divine intelligence has no hierarchy. It sees equality in all causes, perfection in all flows. To the enlightened mind, forgiveness is childish, a relic of the moral stage of evolution. Understanding is its replacement. Forgiveness dies when you understand the sacred logic of existence. You realize that every person who hurt you was your unconscious teacher. Every loss was a redirection. Every betrayal was a mirror. Every humiliation was the breaking of your false self. You begin to thank the very things you once cursed. Spinoza's philosophy is not about kindness, it's about clarity. He teaches you to love reality, not as you wish it were, but as it is. Because the moment you love the real without resistance, the battle ends, and what's left is peace. Not because the world is gentle, but because your perception has become divine. The world will call this indifference, but it's not indifference, it's sovereignty. A man who understands no longer needs forgiveness, validation, or emotional closure. He stands alone, radiant in his lucidity. He no longer demands life to be fair. He knows that fairness is a human fantasy, not a cosmic law. He doesn't need karma to punish anyone. He doesn't need justice to feel complete, because completion is already his state of being. That is the highest power, the power of neutrality born from understanding. Spinoza called it beatitudo, blessedness. It's not joy in the emotional sense, but the unshakable calm that comes from seeing the divine order in all things. Let's pause here. Think about your life. Think about every time you said, I forgive them. Was it truly forgiveness, or was it a performance of control? Was it peace, or was it pride disguised as compassion? Be honest, because real peace doesn't need to announce itself. It just exists. Like sunlight, silent and total, forgiveness is for the wounded. Understanding is for the awakened. The moment you see this difference, you begin to rise. And from that moment, no one can emotionally enslave you again. If you felt that subtle shift inside you, that sense that you've been forgiving for the wrong reasons, that you've been carrying illusions in the name of virtue, then this message is your mirror. Subscribe to Light of the Spirit right now, because this channel isn't for the comforted, it's for the awakened. Share this video with someone who's trapped in guilt or bitterness. Let them see that they don't need to forgive. They need to understand. Now comes the paradox that makes Spinoza timeless. Once you reach the state where forgiveness is useless, you begin to love everything. Because when you understand all causes, how can you hate? When you see the perfection behind imperfection, how can you resist? And that love, not emotional, not moral, but cosmic, becomes your natural state. Forgiveness is a gesture. Love is a state. Forgiveness says, I will release you. Love says, there was nothing to release. That's the final step of the Spinoza's journey, to stop pretending to be virtuous, and instead become transparent to truth. This is where philosophy ends and enlightenment begins. Because the goal is not to learn about truth, it's to become truth, to merge your perception with the law that governs all things. Then nothing external can disturb your peace. No insult can penetrate you. No injustice can poison you. No heartbreak can define you. You become part of the divine geometry, the great order that doesn't need forgiveness because it never condemns. That's what Spinoza meant when he said the wise man is free. Not free from society, but free from emotional illusion. Not free because life is gentle, but because he has stopped fighting what is, and from that stillness he acts. Not as a victim, not as a hero, but as an instrument of clarity, a quiet force of nature. There's a silence that follows true understanding. It's not emptiness as it's peace, the kind that doesn't come from meditation retreats or moral effort, but from the simple realization that nothing was ever personal. This is the highest level of consciousness Spinoza was pointing to. A state where the self dissolves into the logic of the universe, where love is no longer an emotion but a recognition, where forgiveness, guilt, and resentment lose all meaning, because the idea of offense itself disappears. When you reach this level, you don't need to forgive your past. You see it. You see how every moment was necessary, how every person was a reflection of your inner state, how every wound was an awakening disguised as pain. You realize that the person you once blamed was never your enemy. They were part of your evolution. And that realization changes everything. You stop replaying arguments in your mind. You stop waiting for apologies. You stop imagining revenge. Because now you understand, no one truly hurt you. They only revealed what was unhealed within you. This is not forgiveness, it's transcendence. Forgiveness still implies duality, you versus them, victim versus offender. Transcendence dissolves the duality entirely. It says there was never me and them. Only consciousness experiencing itself through contrast. Spinoza would have said it this way: the more you understand, the less you suffer. Because suffering is born from resistance. And resistance comes from not seeing the full picture. When you understand the necessity of things, you stop resisting life. You stop fighting reality. And when you stop fighting, you finally begin to live. In modern terms, this means something very simple. You stop wasting emotional energy on trying to change people. You stop expecting fairness from chaos. You stop chasing closure from those who live in confusion. You don't forgive your parents. You understand they were products of their conditioning. You don't forgive your partner. You understand that their fear shaped their behavior. You don't forgive your friends who disappeared. You understand that everyone moves according to their inner weather. And when you see all this clearly, something miraculous happens. You begin to feel gratitude, not bitterness. You see that every disappointment was a lesson. Every betrayal redirected your path. Every loss carved space for wisdom. That's the invisible architecture of divine intelligence, the structure behind every seeming injustice. Spinoza's truth is not comfortable, but it is liberating, because it takes power away from emotions and gives it back to understanding. Forgiveness requires effort. Understanding requires awareness. And awareness, once it awakens, becomes effortless. It sees, it accepts, it adapts, it acts, without friction, without drama. This is what it means to be free. Not free because you've forgiven your enemies, but free because you no longer need enemies. The most dangerous kind of human is the one who understands. Because you cannot control someone who sees through illusion. You cannot manipulate someone who knows how necessity works. You cannot offend someone who refuses to take things personally. You cannot guilt-trip someone who knows that morality is a mask for control. This person is calm, untouchable, and infinitely powerful because they no longer react. They act from clarity, not emotion. They don't fight the world. They flow through it, shaping it quietly. Like water, gentle, unstoppable, and necessary. You may ask, if forgiveness is useless, what should I do when I'm wronged? The answer is, understand the mechanism. Study the cause, not the moral. See the chain of fear, ignorance, and desire that made it happen. Then ask yourself, what is this situation trying to teach me about my own dependence, my own illusions, my own expectations? Once you see the lesson, you evolve. Once you evolve, you no longer suffer. And once you no longer suffer, the need for forgiveness vanishes entirely. That's Spinoza's formula for enlightenment. Understanding, acceptance, peace. If this message resonates with you, if you feel a spark of recognition, a quiet voice that says, yes, this is the freedom I've been searching for, then this is your moment. Subscribe to Light of the Spirit now, because this channel isn't about escapism, it's about awakening. We speak truths that dismantle illusions. Share this video with someone still trapped in the endless cycle of guilt, resentment, and forgiveness. Let them see that understanding is the only real healing. When you live like this, every day becomes sacred. You start noticing that peace isn't something you find. It's something that appears when you stop fighting what is. You walk through chaos untouched. You look into the eyes of those who once hurt you, and you feel nothing but stillness. Not love in the sentimental sense, but love as clarity, love as neutrality, love as recognition. You finally understand that forgiveness was only a bridge, a temporary illusion for those who couldn't yet see that there was never separation to begin with. Forgiveness is a story for the human ego. Understanding is the language of the divine mind. And when you begin to speak that language, life no longer demands effort. It flows through you like wind through open hands. So the next time someone asks you if you've forgiven, you can smile gently and say, there was nothing to forgive. There was only something to understand. That is the end of resentment. That is the beginning of freedom. That is Spinoza's secret. The secret of peace that no religion could give and no enemy could take away. Remember, forgiveness belongs to those who still believe in enemies. Understanding belongs to those who have seen through the illusion of separation. Be the second kind. Be the one who sees clearly. Be the one who doesn't need to forgive because your peace is already absolute. That is divine intelligence. That is freedom. That is the light of the Spirit.